The Voldorian Empire had been conquering worlds for over 10,000 years. They had taken more than 3,000 planets across the galaxy. Their warships were massive and powerful. Their soldiers were tall and covered in scales that shimmered like jewels. Every species they had ever met had fallen to their knees and surrendered. This was the way of things. The strong took from the weak. The Voldorians were the strongest. Admiral Kethrix stood on the bridge of his flagship, a ship so large it could carry a small city inside it. The ship was called the Eternal Dominion, and it had never lost a battle. Kethrix himself had conquered 47 worlds in his long career. He was old by Voldorian standards, over 300 years, but his mind was still sharp and his ambition still burned. Below him, a small blue planet rotated slowly in the darkness of space. His scouts had found it 6 months ago, orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The species living there called their world Earth. They called themselves humans. Kethrix had studied the reports carefully. The humans were a young species. They had only been using technology for a few hundred years. They had not yet learned to travel faster than light. They were stuck on their single planet, fighting among themselves over resources and beliefs. Their most powerful weapons were nuclear bombs, devices that split atoms to create explosions. Primitive, dangerous to themselves perhaps, but laughable against Voldorian shields. The humans themselves were small and soft. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They lived for less than 100 years. They needed to eat constantly and sleep for a third of their lives. By every measure the Voldorians used, they were a weak species. Easy prey. Send the subjugation broadcast, Kethrix ordered. His voice was calm and bored. He had done this many times before. His communications officer pressed a button and a signal went out to the planet below. It reached every device capable of receiving it. Every television, every radio, every phone, every computer. The signal carried a message, and the message was translated instantly into every human language. On the screen appeared the face of Admiral Kethrix. His scales were purple and gold. His eyes were large and yellow with black slits for pupils. When he spoke, his voice was deep and cold. "People of Earth," the message said, "I am Admiral Kethrix of the Voldorian Empire. Your planet now belongs to us. Your resources belong to us. Your labor belongs to us. You are now subjects of the Empire. Resistance is not possible. Our technology is thousands of years ahead of yours. Our soldiers number in the millions. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your armies cannot stop us. You have one planetary rotation to surrender your governments and your military forces. If you do not comply, we will take what we want by force. There will be no mercy. There will be no negotiation. This is your only warning." The message ended. Kethrix leaned back in his command chair and waited. In his experience, the first hour after a subjugation broadcast was always the most interesting. Some species panicked immediately. Others tried to send messages begging for terms. A few attempted to fight, but they always gave up quickly once they saw the power of Voldorian weapons. He expected humans to be the panicking type. They were so fragile, so short-lived. Surely they would want to preserve what little time they had. On Earth, 7 billion people watched the message. For a moment, the entire planet was silent. Then the silence ended in a small farmhouse in Kansas. A man named Danny Cole sat at his kitchen table. He was 53 years old. He had fought in 2 wars when he was younger and had worked the same piece of land his father and grandfather had worked before him. His wife Linda sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Well," Danny said, his voice flat and calm, "that's not going to happen." Linda looked at him. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else too. something hard and stubborn. No, she agreed. It's not. Across the world, in cities and villages, in mansions and apartments, in places of war and places of peace, billions of humans had the same thought. Not anger, not yet. Just a simple, stubborn refusal. This was their home. No one was going to take it from them. In Washington, the President of the United States picked up a red phone. In Moscow, the Russian president did the same. In Beijing, in London, in Paris, in New Delhi, leaders who had spent their careers as rivals suddenly found themselves allies. The old arguments no longer mattered. The old wars no longer mattered. There was only one question now. How do we fight back? Within 6 hours, the United Nations Security Council had met. Within 12 hours, something that had never happened in human history occurred. Every nation on Earth agreed to work together. Every army, every navy, every air force was placed under a single command. Old enemies shook hands. Old hatreds were set aside. Humanity had found something it never had before: unity. A woman named Samantha Price was placed in charge of the military response. She was a colonel in the United States Air Force, 41 years old, with short brown hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had led soldiers in 3 different wars. She had buried friends and sent young people to die for their country. She was tired of war, but she understood it. She stood before a room full of generals from 30 different nations. Men and women who had trained their whole lives to fight each other now sat side by side, waiting for her orders. "Here's what we know," she said, pointing to a screen showing images of the alien fleet. "They have 12 large ships and about 50 smaller ones. They have weapons we don't understand and shields that can stop our missiles. They think this is going to be easy. They think we're going to give up." She paused and looked around the room. "They're wrong. I don't care how advanced they are. I don't care how many worlds they've conquered. This is our home, and we are not going to hand it over to anyone. We may not be able to beat them today. We may not be able to beat them tomorrow. But we are going to make them bleed for every inch of ground they take. We are going to make them regret ever finding our little planet. And if we have to die, we are going to die standing up, fighting back, showing them exactly what humans are made of." The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the generals began to nod. Some of them even smiled. They knew she was right. Surrender was not in their nature. It never had been above them. Admiral Kethrix waited for the humans to give up. He would be waiting for a very long time. Admiral Kethrix watched the clock on his display count down the hours. The humans had been given 1 planetary rotation to surrender. That time was almost over. His communications officer had received thousands of signals from the planet below, but none of them were surrender messages. Most of them were insults in hundreds of different languages. A few were crude images that even Kethrix, who had seen many strange things in his long life, found confusing. "They are not going to comply," his second-in-command observed. "No," Kethrix agreed. "They are not. Begin the landing operations." The first wave of Valdorian soldiers descended to Earth in drop pods. Each pod carried 12 soldiers, and each soldier was a veteran of dozens of conquests. They were over 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that had been enhanced with energy shields. Their weapons could fire bolts of plasma hot enough to melt steel. They expected no real resistance. The first pods landed in major cities around the world: New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing. The Valdorians had learned that conquering a species was mostly about psychology. If you captured their leaders and their symbols of power, the rest of them would fall in line. In New York City, 12 Valdorian soldiers materialized in the middle of Times Square. The famous screens that usually showed advertisements now displayed the Valdorian flag. The streets should have been empty, the humans hiding in their homes, waiting to see what would happen. Instead, there was a crowd. Thousands of people had gathered in the square. They were not running. They were not screaming. They were just standing there, watching the aliens with expressions that ranged from fear to anger to something that looked almost like hunger. The lead soldier, a veteran named Kratos, stepped forward. He had done this before on many worlds. The primitives always backed away when they saw how tall and powerful the Voldorians were. They always lowered their eyes and trembled. These humans did not lower their eyes. They stared right at him. A young man pushed through the crowd. He was wearing a cap with some kind of symbol on it and carrying a wooden stick. He was so small compared to Kratos that it was almost funny. The human stopped a few feet away from the soldiers and looked up at them. "You boys lost?" he asked. Kratos pointed his weapon at the human. "Kneel before the Empire. Primitive. Kneel or die." The young man's name was Kevin Barnes. He was 26 years old. He worked at a grocery store and lived with 2 roommates in a small apartment in Brooklyn. He had never been in a real fight in his life. He was terrified. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his baseball bat, but he did not kneel. "No," Kevin said. His voice cracked, but he did not take back the word. The crowd behind him stirred. Someone shouted something. Then someone else. The shouts grew louder, merging into a roar that echoed off the tall buildings around them. Kratos had never heard a sound like it. It was not just noise. It was a challenge, a promise, a threat. "Kill him," he ordered. One of his soldiers raised a weapon. A bolt of plasma flew toward Kevin Barnes' dot. It never reached him. A man in a suit threw himself in front of Kevin, taking the bolt in his chest. He died instantly, his body crashing to the ground. But before Kratos could give another order, the crowd surged forward. They came from every direction. Thousands of humans running straight at the Valdorian soldiers. They had no armor, no shields, no plasma weapons. They had baseball bats and kitchen knives and pieces of pipe torn from construction sites. They had their bare hands and their teeth. And they had something else, something Kratos had never seen before. They did not care if they died. The first humans to reach the soldiers were killed instantly. Plasma bolts tore through them, turning flesh to ash. But more came behind them, and more, and more. They climbed over the bodies of their fallen and kept coming. They grabbed at the soldiers' weapons, their arms, their legs. They pulled them down through sheer weight of numbers. Kratos felt hands on his armor. Dozens of hands, then hundreds. His shield flickered as too many bodies pressed against it. He fired his weapon again and again. But for every human he killed, 10 more took their place. He felt something heavy strike the back of his head. Then something else. His vision blurred. He fell. The humans did not stop hitting him until long after he was dead. When the fighting ended, 8 of the 12 Valdorian soldiers were dead. The survivors had managed to teleport back to their ship, badly wounded. They brought with them video footage that would change everything. Admiral Kethrix watched the footage in silence. He saw his soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, pulled down by creatures half their size. He saw humans dying by the dozens and not caring. He saw them tear his soldiers apart with their bare hands. "This is not possible," he said, but it was possible. It had happened. And it was happening all over the planet. In London, a group of soldiers had landed near Buckingham Palace. They were met by a mob armed with cricket bats and broken bottles. In Moscow, Valdorian troops encountered civilians who threw themselves under military vehicles just to slow them down. In Tokyo, an old woman with a kitchen knife had managed to stab a soldier in the gap between his armor plates before she was killed. Everywhere, it was the same. The humans were not surrendering. They were not running. They were fighting with whatever they had, and they were dying in huge numbers, and they did not seem to care. Kethrix had conquered 47 worlds. He had seen species beg for mercy. He had seen them try to negotiate. He had seen them flee to the most remote parts of their planets, hoping to hide. He had never seen anything like this. What are they? His second-in-command asked. Kethrix did not answer. He did not know. On the ground, the humans were counting their dead. Thousands had fallen in the first day of fighting, but they had killed nearly 200 Valdorian soldiers. It was not a victory. It was barely even a start. But it was something. Samantha Price received the reports in a bunker deep beneath a mountain. She read the numbers, the locations, the names of the dead. She read about Kevin Barnes, who had survived and was now being treated as a hero. She read about the man in the suit who had saved his life. A liar named Gregory Dunn, who had left behind a wife and 2 children. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "They can be killed," she said quietly. "They bleed just like we do." The other officers in the room nodded. They all understood what this meant. The enemy was not invincible. The enemy could be hurt. And if the enemy could be hurt, the enemy could be defeated. Outside the bunker, the sun was setting on a world at war. But for the first time since the aliens had arrived, the humans felt something other than fear. They felt hope. The first week of the invasion was a nightmare for both sides. The Voldorians had overwhelming firepower, but they were learning that firepower was not everything. The humans were dying in large numbers, but they were also learning. And humans, it turned out, learned very fast. In the mountains of Afghanistan, a group of fighters who had spent decades battling each other discovered they now had a common enemy. Their leader was an old man named Hassan, who had been fighting invaders since he was a boy. First the Soviets, then others. Now the Valdorians. The names and faces changed, but the mountains remained the same. Hassan watched a Valdorian patrol move through a narrow valley below his position. There were 20 soldiers, walking in a careful formation, their weapons ready. They had scanners that could detect metal and body heat. They had drones flying above them that could see for miles. They thought they were safe. Hassan smiled. He had been killing invaders in these mountains for 40 years. He knew things no scanner could detect. He gave a signal, and rocks began to fall. The Valdorians looked up in surprise as the mountainside came down on top of them. They had shields that could stop plasma bolts and missiles. They could not stop 100 tons of stone. Half the patrol was buried instantly. The survivors stumbled out of the dust, confused and hurt. That was when the fighters attacked. They came from hidden caves that had been dug generations ago. They used weapons made of wood and stone that would not trigger the alien scanners. They moved like ghosts through the dust and chaos, striking fast and disappearing before the Valdorians could react. When it was over, 17 of the 20 Valdorians were dead. Hassan had lost only 3 of his men. News of the victory spread quickly, not through official channels, but through whispers and coded messages. The aliens could be ambushed. The aliens could be trapped. The aliens could be killed. Across the world, humans began to fight smarter. In Vietnam, soldiers who had inherited their grandparents' knowledge of tunnel warfare began to dig. They created vast underground networks that stretched for miles. The Voldorian sensors could not see through solid rock. Patrols that entered the jungle simply vanished. One day there would be 20 soldiers. The next day there would be none. The Voldorians never found the bodies. In Australia, a farmer named Greg Hunt discovered something interesting. The alien shields were powered by some kind of energy field that ran at a specific frequency. When he hooked up a car battery to a piece of metal fencing and touched it to a dead Valdorian's armor, the shield emitted a strange sound and flickered. "It's like a radio," Greg said to his wife. "If you hit it with the right signal, it gets confused." He was not a scientist. He was a man who fixed tractors and harvested wheat. But he understood machines, and he understood that every machine had a weakness. Greg spent 3 days in his barn, building something. He used parts from old cars, bits of wire from his fencing, and a satellite dish that had been knocked down during the invasion. When he was done, he had a device that looked like something from a bad science fiction movie. He tested it on a Valdorian patrol that passed near his property. The soldiers saw him standing in the open, holding his strange device. They raised their weapons to kill him. Greg pressed the button. The shields flickered and died. For just a moment, the Valdorians were unprotected. That moment was enough. Greg's neighbors, hidden in the wheat fields around them, opened fire with hunting rifles. The Valdorians fell. Greg stared at the bodies in disbelief. Then he began to laugh. "It works," he said. "It actually works." Within a week, the design had been shared with resistance groups around the world. They called it the Bug Zapper. It was crude and unreliable and had to be rebuilt after every use. But it worked. In Texas, a retired soldier named Chris Porter organized a resistance cell. They operated out of an abandoned shopping center, using the large building to hide their activities from Valdorian drones. Chris was 58 years old, with gray hair and a bad knee from an old injury. He should have been sitting on his porch, drinking beer and watching the sunset. Instead, he was teaching young people how to kill aliens. "The Bug Zapper gives us about half a second," he explained to a group of new recruits. "That's not a lot of time. You need to be close. You need to be ready. And you need to be willing to die, because half the time you're going to." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Her name was Maria Santos. She had been an electrical engineer before the invasion. Now she was a fighter. What if we could make it last longer? She asked. Chris looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "The device disrupts their shields by hitting them with the wrong frequency. But it's a single pulse. What if we could make it continuous? Like jamming a radio signal instead of just interrupting it once?" Chris smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since the invasion began. "Can you build something like that?" he asked. "Give me a week," Maria said. "You have 3 days." Maria worked for 2 days straight, without sleep. She took apart every bug zapper they had captured and studied the components. She ran calculations on paper because the computers were too risky to use. She burned her fingers on hot wires and cut herself on sharp metal. On the 3rd day, she finished. The new device was larger than the original bug zapper. It required a generator to power it and took 2 people to carry. But when they tested it on a captured piece of Valdorian armor, the shield did not just flicker. It died completely and stayed dead for almost 10 seconds. 10 seconds was an eternity in combat. The first real test came a week later, when a Valdorian patrol entered the town of Midland, looking for the resistance base. Chris and his people were waiting. Maria activated her device. The aliens' shields fell. The humans opened fire. 12 Valdorians entered Midland that day. None of them left. Admiral Kethrix received the report in his command center. Another patrol lost. Another group of his soldiers dead. The humans were adapting faster than any species he had ever encountered. They were learning his soldiers' weaknesses and exploiting them. They were turning his own technology against him. He had brought 100,000 soldiers to Earth. In 30 days, he had lost 15,000. At this rate, he would run out of troops before he ran out of planet. He requested reinforcements from the Emperor. The message that came back was cold and harsh. Handle it yourself, or admit your failure. Kethrix stared at the message for a long time. Then he made a decision. If he could not conquer these humans, he would destroy them. He would burn their cities from orbit. He would turn their oceans to steam and their forests to ash. He would leave nothing but a dead rock floating in space. It was not what he wanted. Dead planets produce no resources, no labor, no tribute. But some enemies were too dangerous to let live. "Prepare the fleet for orbital bombardment," he ordered. "Maximum power. All targets." The humans had won every battle so far, but they were about to lose the war, or so Kethrix believed. The Voldorian fleet moved into position above Earth. 12 massive warships, each one over 3 miles long, arranged themselves in a pattern that would allow them to fire on every continent at once. Their weapons were fully charged. Their targeting systems were locked. In a few hours, every major city on the planet would be reduced to glass and ash. Admiral Kethrix watched from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. He felt no pleasure in what he was about to do. The humans had proven themselves worthy opponents. In another time, under different circumstances, he might have respected them. But war did not care about respect. War only cared about victory. "Admiral," one of his officers said, "we are detecting unusual activity in the planet's oceans." Kethrix frowned. "What kind of activity?" "Submarine vessels. Hundreds of them. They appear to be moving towards specific coordinates." This was strange. The human submarines were primitive things that could barely leave their own waters. They posed no threat to ships in orbit. Why would they be gathering? "Continue preparations," Kethrix ordered. "The submarines are irrelevant." Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, Captain Jake Warren stood in the control room of his submarine. The boat was called the Liberty, and it was one of the most advanced vessels in the American fleet. But right now, it was carrying something that no submarine had ever carried before. 3 weeks ago, a team of soldiers had captured a damaged Valdorian scout ship that had crashed in the Nevada desert. The ship's navigation computer had been mostly destroyed, but a young technician named Paul Chun had managed to salvage some of the data. The data included the frequency codes for Valdorian shield technology. The same frequency codes that the bug Zapper used to disrupt shields on the ground. Someone in the Pentagon had asked a simple question. What if we could do the same thing on a larger scale? What if we could disrupt the shields of an entire ship, even for just a moment? And what if, during that moment, we hit them with everything we had? The answer was the most desperate plan in human history. Every nuclear submarine in the world had been modified. Their missiles, originally designed to destroy human cities, had been rebuilt. Each missile now carried 2 payloads. The first was a massive bug zapper device, scaled up 100 times and powered by its own generator. The second was a nuclear warhead. The plan was simple. The bug zapper would hit first, disrupting the alien shields. The nuclear warhead would hit a fraction of a second later, before the shields could recover. It was insane. It probably would not work. But it was the only chance they had. Jake looked around his control room at the faces of his crew. They were scared. They should be scared. Most of them would probably die in the next hour. But they were here anyway, ready to do what needed to be done. His executive officer, a woman named Amy Tran, approached him. "All missiles are ready, Captain," she said. "We're waiting for the signal." Jake nodded. "How are the crew?" "Terrified," Amy said honestly, "but determined. They know what's at stake. What about you?" Jake asked. Amy smiled. It was a sad smile, but there was strength in it. "I have a daughter in San Diego. She's 8 years old. Her name is Lily. If there's even a chance that what we're doing today will let her grow up in a world without these monsters, then I'm ready." Jake reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "Then let's give her that chance." On the surface, General Samantha Price sat in a bunker watching satellite feeds of the Valdorian fleet. She could see the weapons charging, the ships moving into position. She had maybe 3 hours before the bombardment began. She picked up a phone connected to a secure military network. "This is Price," she said. "Execute Hail Mary." The signal went out to every submarine in the ocean. 600 missiles launched within seconds of each other. They rose from the water like a swarm of angry wasps, climbing toward the sky on pillars of fire. Admiral Ketherick saw them coming. His officers reported the launches with mild confusion. Primitive chemical rockets? Against starships? The very idea was insulting. Should we destroy them? An officer asked. Ketherick waved his hand dismissively. Why bother? Let them come. Let them see how useless their weapons are against our shields. The missiles climbed higher and higher. They left the atmosphere and entered the cold darkness of space. They spread out, each one targeting a different ship in the Valdorian fleet, on the Eternal Dominion. An officer suddenly sat up straight. Admiral, I'm reading unusual energy signatures from the incoming missiles. They appear to be carrying some kind of electromagnetic pulse device. Ketherick leaned forward, suddenly interested. What kind of device? Before the officer could answer, the missiles reached their targets. The bug zapper payloads detonated for exactly 0.3 of a second. Every shield in the Valdorian fleet shut down. 0.3 of a second was not very long. A human could blink twice in that time. But the nuclear warheads behind the bug zappers were traveling at incredible speed. They crossed the remaining distance in less than 1/10 of a second. 200 nuclear weapons detonated against unshielded Valdorian ships. Admiral Ketherick had exactly enough time to understand what was happening before the Eternal Dominion was torn apart. The bridge exploded around him. Fire consumed everything. The last thing he saw was the blue planet he had come to conquer, shining peacefully below. Then there was only light. Across the fleet, the story was the same. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds were suddenly facing the raw power of nuclear fire at point-blank range. Their shields, which could stop any energy weapon in the galaxy, had been taken away at exactly the wrong moment. Metal melted. Reactors exploded. Crews died without ever understanding what had hit them. 9 Valdorian warships were destroyed instantly. 2 more were so badly damaged that they drifted helplessly, their crews dead or dying. Only 3 ships survived, and even they were hurt. The surviving commanders did not hesitate. They activated their faster-than-light drives and fled. They did not try to rescue survivors. They did not try to fight back. They simply ran. On Earth, billions of people watched the sky light up with distant explosions. At first, they did not understand what they were seeing. Then the news began to spread. The alien fleet was gone. The bombardment would not happen. They had one dot in her bunker. Samantha Price received the report. Her hands were shaking. There were tears in her eyes. How many missiles hit? She asked. About 200, General. The rest missed or were destroyed before impact. And our submarines? There was a long pause. We lost 70% of them, ma'am. The aliens managed to target some before they could dive deep enough. 70%. Thousands of sailors dead. Jake Warren and his crew were among the survivors, but so many others were gone. But they had done it. They had stopped the bombardment. They had saved their world. Samantha looked up at the ceiling of her bunker, imagining the sky beyond. We won, she said quietly. We actually won. But even as she spoke, she knew that this was not the end. The Valdorian Empire was vast, and they would not take this defeat lightly. Sooner or later, they would return. But that was a problem for another day. Today, humanity had proven something important. They had shown the galaxy that they were not easy prey. They had shown that even a small, primitive species could fight back against overwhelming odds. They had shown that they would never, ever give up. The 3 surviving Valdorian ships limped across the galaxy, carrying with them stories that would change everything. They did not stop at any friendly ports. They did not send messages ahead. They simply flew as fast as they could, putting as much distance between themselves and Earth as possible. When they finally reached the Valdorian throne world, the Emperor himself demanded to see the recordings. He was an ancient being, over 2,000 years old, who had ruled the empire since before most of his subjects' grandparents were born. He had seen countless species rise and fall. He had ordered the destruction of worlds that displeased him. Nothing surprised him anymore until now. He watched the footage in his private chamber. He saw his soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, pulled down by creatures half their size. He saw humans dying by the hundreds and charging forward anyway. He saw improvised weapons and desperate tactics and a fury that seemed to have no limit. He saw the nuclear explosions that destroyed his fleet. Bright flowers of fire blooming in the darkness of space. "Explain this to me," he said to the surviving commander, a young officer named Vethros. Vethros had been the captain of the smallest ship in the fleet. He had survived because he had been furthest from the nuclear blasts. He still had burns on his scales from the radiation that had leaked through his damaged shields. "They are called humans, Divine One," Vethros said. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes that the Emperor had never seen before in a Valdorian officer. "Fear. Tell me about them," the Emperor commanded. Vethros took a deep breath. "They are small, Divine One, soft. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. They live for less than 100 years. By every measure we use, they should have been easy to conquer. And yet they fought us with a ferocity we have never encountered. They threw themselves at our soldiers with no regard for their own lives. When one fell, 2 more took their place. When we destroyed their cities, they hid in the ruins and kept fighting. When we killed their leaders, new leaders rose within hours." The Emperor leaned forward on his throne. "Every species fights when cornered. This is not unusual. With respect, Divine One, this was different. Other species fight to survive. Humans fight to win. They adapted to our tactics within days. They learned our weaknesses and exploited them. They turned our own technology against us." Vethros paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I have fought on 20 worlds, Divine One. I have seen brave enemies and cowardly ones. I have seen species accept death with dignity and species that beg for mercy. I have never seen anything like humans. What makes them different?" Vethros thought about the question. He thought about the videos he had watched, the reports he had read, the battles he had witnessed. He thought about the look in the eyes of human prisoners, the way they never stopped planning escape, never stopped looking for weakness. "They know they are going to die," he finally said. "Their lives are so short that death is always close to them. Every human knows that their time is limited. And instead of making them afraid, this knowledge makes them fearless. They do not fight despite knowing they will die. They fight because of it. Every moment is precious to them, and they will not let anyone take those moments away." The Emperor sat in silence for a long time. Outside his window, the great city of the throne world stretched to the horizon. Millions of Valdorians went about their daily lives, safe and comfortable, protected by the greatest military force in the galaxy, a military force that had just been humiliated by a species that had not even discovered faster than light travel. "What do you recommend?" the Emperor finally asked. Vethros did not hesitate. "Leave them alone, Divine One. Mark their system as forbiddance. Do not send more ships. Do not try to contact them. Do not give them any reason to look beyond their own star. You want me to show weakness? To run from these primitives? I want us to survive, Divine One. Right now, the humans cannot reach us. They are trapped in their own solar system. But they learn quickly. They adapt. They do not give up. If we keep fighting them, they will eventually figure out how to leave their system. They will come looking for us. And when they find us, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The Emperor made his decision. A message was sent across the Valdorian Empire. It was marked with the Emperor's personal seal, giving it the highest possible authority. The message was simple and clear. The planet known as Earth is forbidden. The species known as humans are not to be contacted, threatened, or approached in any way. Any ship that enters their system will be destroyed by Imperial order. Any commander who disobeys this order will be executed. This decree is permanent and will not be changed. The message spread beyond the Valdorian Empire, shared by traders and travelers and spies. Within a year, every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy had heard the story of the Blue Planet and its terrifying inhabitants. On Earth, the humans knew nothing about any of this. They were too busy rebuilding. The invasion had cost them dearly. Millions were dead. Cities lay in ruins. The old divisions between nations had healed, but the scars remained. General Samantha Price, now the most famous military leader in human history, stood at the site of the first successful bug zapper attack in Texas. A simple stone memorial had been built there, listing the names of everyone who had died fighting the Valdorians. A young soldier approached her. His name was Danny Cole Jr., the son of the Kansas farmer who had said, "That's not going to happen," on the first day of the invasion. His father had survived the war and gone back to farming. Danny had joined the New Earth Defense Force. "Ma'am," he said, "do you think they'll come back?" Samantha looked up at the sky. It was blue and peaceful, with white clouds drifting slowly past. Somewhere up there, in the blackness between the stars, the debris of the Valdorian fleet still floated. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe someday. But now they know something they didn't know before." "What's that, ma'am?" Samantha turned to face him. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the weight of everything she had seen and done. But her eyes were still sharp, still fierce. They know what happens when you back humanity into a corner. They know we don't give up. We don't surrender. We don't die quietly. She put a hand on his shoulder. And when the next empire comes looking for trouble, they'll learn the same lesson. Because that's who we are. That's what makes us human. Danny nodded slowly. He understood. Every human understood. They were not the biggest species in the galaxy. They were not the strongest or the oldest or the most advanced. But they had something that other species did not have. They had a stubbornness that refused to accept defeat. They had a creativity that could turn any weapon against its user. They had a unity that came from knowing their time was short and they had each other. The Valdorian Empire continued to rule its 3,000 worlds. But they never forgot what had happened at Earth, in their military academies. The invasion was studied as an example of what not to do. In their stories and legends, humans became monsters, creatures of nightmare who could not be killed and could not be stopped. But on Earth, life went on. Children were born. Cities were rebuilt. People fell in love and grew old and died, just as they always had. The invasion became history, then legend, then something that grandparents told their grandchildren. Humans had always been storytellers. Now they had the greatest story of all. They had faced the darkness of space and survived. They had fought an empire and won. They had earned their place among the stars. And somewhere out there in the galaxy, in every corner of every empire and civilization, a warning was whispered: "Do not go to Earth. Do not challenge the humans. They are small and short-lived and fragile, but they are also the most dangerous species in the galaxy, because humans do not know how to give up, and they never, ever will."